So for the first time in 3 decades, the Teamsters aren't endorsing a presidential candidate. Jimmy Hoffa is turning over in his grave, which is really going to mess with the foundation of Hillary's house.
Greg Gutfeld made fun of watching Kamala Harris on MSNBC, comparing it to playing boring board games like Sorry or Risk. Harris was seriously discussing big issues like the border crisis with Stephanie Ruhle, but Gutfeld turned it into a joke on Fox News, calling it a big snooze. What will Harris's reaction be to Gutfeld's sharp humor? Let us find out how his mocking might shake things up in the political world. Kamala Harris's strategy unveiled. On the other side, Greg Gutfeld from Fox News, who is known for his straightforward and often harsh criticism, made some jokes about how many people would rather avoid watching anything on MSNBC. He compared the experience to playing a boring board game like Sorry or Risk, poking fun at how dull he thought it would be. This reflected a common sentiment, especially among those who are skeptical about her and MSNBC in general. Gutfeld paused, his smirk fading. "But soon," he said, "a revelation will shake us all, revealing that we've been part of the game." President Joe Biden tends to take a more laid-back approach in his media appearances, often sticking to lighter topics. In contrast, her interview was expected to focus on heavier issues, especially the ongoing border crisis. However, when she spoke about the border, it seemed like her main goal was to improve her public image, not to actually solve the problem. Many people, including critics like Gutfeld, felt this was just a political move rather than a real effort to fix the situation. Ruhle, who clearly supports her, seemed more interested in making sure people understood that Harris is not Trump. She appeared to be more concerned with protecting her from tough questions than digging into the real issues that many viewers would have wanted addressed. This made the interview feel less like an honest conversation and more like an attempt to shield her from criticism. The setting of the interview didn't help much either. Gutfeld humorously commented that the backdrop looked like a back room at a Home Depot store, as if both participants were sitting on display toilets. This kind of humor pointed out the informal and somewhat strange feel of the interview, making it harder to take seriously. Instead of deep discussions on pressing topics, the conversation felt light and somewhat empty. But that wasn't even the worst part. The interview didn't seem to offer any meaningful answers to the real problems people are facing, such as inflation, crime, and especially the border situation. Instead of presenting clear solutions, her responses seemed vague and unclear. Gutfeld criticized this, suggesting that her change in attitude about the border was purely for show, driven by her low approval ratings, rather than by any genuine concern for fixing the problem. She has had many opportunities to deal with the border crisis over the years, but she has largely stayed away from it. Despite being appointed by President Biden to oversee immigration and secure the southern border, her involvement has been minimal. This lack of attention frustrated many Americans, especially those living near the border who deal with these challenges firsthand. Now, her sudden interest in the border seemed like a calculated move to win back the support of voters who were losing patience. Ruhle's approach to the interview was seen by some as overly biased, as if she was there more to cheer her on than to ask difficult questions. If she had been any more supportive, some joked she might as well have been a decorative plant in the background. Luckily, the word holistic wasn't thrown around, but the whole interview still felt shallow, with her struggling to explain how she would create an opportunity-driven economy. Her explanations seemed as messy as the very situation she was supposed to be fixing. Concerns grow as she faces tough questions about national issues, navigating border security and public trust. Her responses lacked the depth and clarity that people expect from someone in her position. Instead, it felt like she was new to the job and still figuring things out. This was surprising and disappointing for many who were hoping she would provide clear, concrete answers about how to handle the border crisis and other major issues. The border issue is not new, and she has had plenty of time to come up with solutions. Her decision to visit the border and finally talk about it now felt like a political move, aimed at winning back the support of an electorate that's increasingly frustrated with her inaction. People wanted to hear specific plans, but instead, they got more of the same vague language that left many feeling unsatisfied. The lack of clear responses was especially troubling because the nation is facing serious challenges that need urgent attention. Inflation, crime, and immigration are just a few of the pressing issues that require strong, decisive leadership. Yet during the interview, her answers seem to dodge the real problems, leaving viewers wondering if the administration truly has a plan. But the worst part? Gutfeld and others suggested that her sudden interest in border security was less about solving the issue and more about saving her political career. As her poll numbers drop, especially regarding immigration, it's hard not to see her actions as a desperate attempt to regain lost support. Her timing raised suspicions that she's more concerned with her image than with actually fixing the country's border problems. This skepticism about her motives overshadowed much of the discussion. People questioned whether her concern for border security was genuine or simply a response to the growing frustration with her leadership. It felt like she was reacting to political pressure rather than showing real commitment to finding solutions. Overall, the conversation around her leadership abilities and her handling of major issues, like the border crisis, inflation, and crime, remains uncertain. For many, this interview did little to reassure them that she is up to the task. Instead, it reinforced doubts about whether she's ready and willing to take on the country's toughest challenges head-on, or if she's just going through the motions to keep her political career afloat. The individual we are talking about once worked as a staff member for Pat Lay and also held a role in the Obama administration. From these roles, it is clear that he was deeply involved in Democratic political activities. His experience shows that he has been around the heart of political decisions and the operations that go along with them. However, the main concern in the discussion brought up by Judge Jeanine focused on something much more alarming. She argued that Vice President Kamala Harris seems to show little care for the struggles of everyday Americans. According to Jeanine, if she truly cared, she would be doing something to stop corporations from raising prices unfairly, which is making life harder for many people. Judge Jeanine's criticism was intense. She believes that her lack of action on this issue reveals that she is disconnected from the real problems that affect average citizens. The argument is simple. If she was genuinely concerned about the difficulties people are facing, especially with rising prices, she would act to control corporate behavior. Corporate price gouging, the practice of unfairly increasing prices on products and services, has been a problem for some time, and it continues to make life more expensive for many Americans. Jeanine suggested that her inaction on this issue shows a lack of empathy or care for the struggles of the people she is supposed to represent. Comparisons with past leaders bring her commitment into question, a crisis of accountability. As the conversation continued, Jeanine compared her attitude to that of Donald Trump, the former president. In her view, Trump was someone who genuinely cared about the public and took action to show it. According to Jeanine, Trump's leadership was defined by his empathy for Americans and his willingness to act, while she, by comparison, seems detached and uninterested in fixing the economic issues affecting so many people today. She even went as far as to challenge her to prove her wrong by taking real steps to help people and address their economic struggles. However, the conversation took an even darker turn when Jeanine revealed that a former president was nearly assassinated not once, but twice. The very idea that such a thing could happen is shocking and deeply troubling. It raises important questions about national security and how well we protect our leaders. To make matters worse, Jeanine pointed out the absurdity of offering Secret Service protection to someone like the Iranian president, who, in her words, dislikes the United States, while failing to ensure the safety of one of our own former presidents. This, she argued, shows a serious flaw in how we prioritize security. Even more personal and troubling, the conversation touched on an unsettling incident. After a heated discussion about sensitive topics like assault, someone confronted the narrator at the bottom of a staircase, yelling and swearing, and told them to leave the building. This outburst felt like an attack, despite the fact that the narrator has years of experience as both a prosecutor and a judge, working in tough environments. Despite being accustomed to handling difficult situations, this confrontation felt like a clear case of verbal violence and crossed a line. Yet even this intense encounter wasn't the end of the story. Judge Jeanine continued her critique of her by pointing out another significant issue: her struggles in public appearances. Jeanine argued that she, even when given easy questions in a friendly interview on a liberal news network, struggled to provide clear and effective answers, This was seen as part of a larger problem where she is rarely held accountable by the media. According to Janine, she is often given a free pass and doesn't face the tough questions that other politicians do. This, in her eyes, is concerning because it means that she is not being challenged to explain her policies or to address important national issues like the economy or border security. But what makes this even more troubling is the bigger issue it reveals. Our political leaders must be held accountable, and they must be willing to face difficult questions and provide real answers. Leaders are responsible for addressing the issues that affect the public, and if they are not challenged, they may avoid tackling the tough problems that matter most. Janine's criticism suggests that she has managed to avoid these difficult situations and, as a result, has not been forced to confront the most critical issues facing the country. However, this isn't just about her. It's a broader concern about how political leaders handle their responsibilities. In Janine's view, her reluctance to address these difficult questions and her apparent lack of engagement with major national concerns like corporate price increases and border issues highlight a bigger problem. A leader who may not be fully prepared to handle the nation's most pressing problems. This paints a picture of someone who might be out of touch with the challenges facing everyday Americans, especially when compared to other political figures, such as Trump, who are seen as more engaged with the struggles of the public. The debate on real leadership heats up, focusing on actions versus promises. The contradictions of political leadership. Leadership isn't just about holding a position of power. It's about being there for the people and showing real concern for their problems. Leaders should be transparent, face hard questions, and take action that helps those they serve. By avoiding these responsibilities, it's easy for people to feel disconnected from their leaders, as though their problems are not being addressed. Judge Janine's strong critique centered around this very idea, that leadership means taking action when it's needed most, and being accountable for the decisions that impact millions of people. We often take pride in being Americans, but it's hard to ignore how her team keeps relying on old, worn-out campaign slogans from previous elections. It's surprising because she has criticized the country in the past, calling out issues within the system. Now, however, she expresses pride in the very same nation she once pointed to as having serious problems. This creates a bit of a contradiction, raising questions about whether she truly stands by her words, or if she's simply trying to win support through familiar tactics. Instead of presenting fresh ideas, it seems like her campaign is focusing on getting the financial backing of the wealthy, millionaires and billionaires, to overshadow Donald Trump's promises of peace and economic growth. The strategy appears to be more about wealth and power than offering real solutions for everyday people. What's even more concerning is that her team seems to be betting on this same strategy for future campaigns. The idea is to keep voters somewhat in the dark, without offering concrete promises, and relying more on the appeal of celebrity endorsements and personality-driven campaigns. This approach feels like it's drifting away from what real democracy should be about. Instead of engaging with voters and addressing their concerns, it feels like they're trying to win through style over substance. In many ways, this can feel disrespectful to voters who deserve more than just flashy appearances and empty words. But the real issue doesn't come from Donald Trump, who is known for his blunt and often harsh words about political figures. The real frustration comes from Kamala Harris herself. Her campaign tends to avoid tough questions, which leaves many Americans feeling unheard. For example, when asked questions like, "How will you lower the high cost of living?" a question that speaks to a growing concern across the country, Harris's answers feel scripted and lack real depth. Americans are feeling the pressure from rising living costs and struggling to achieve financial stability. But instead of addressing these concerns in a meaningful way, Harris often gives responses that seem more focused on charm than offering real solutions. This only adds to the feeling that the American dream is becoming harder to reach. Her answers on key issues like the rising cost of living and inflation often come across as dismissive. There's a sense that she assumes voters will support her no matter what, even if she doesn't provide clear or direct solutions to these problems. This attitude is frustrating for many people who are looking for leadership that understands their daily struggles. Laura Ingraham, a well-known political commentator, has pointed out that Harris's habit of avoiding straightforward answers on important topics, like inflation or border security, is part of a bigger problem. Instead of offering clear plans, she tends to fall back on vague statements that don't really address the issues. This raises the question, does she not fully understand the challenges, or is she deliberately avoiding them? Her public responses are examined for depth, revealing a pattern of avoidance. Veiled realities. It's hard not to notice a pattern when Harris speaks in interviews. Often, her responses feel like a student who didn't fully prepare for a test, rephrasing the question instead of giving a real answer. This was especially clear when she was asked about the situation at the border. Instead of directly addressing the issue, she gave roundabout answers that didn't really solve anything. Ingram also points out that there is a big gap between what Harris says in public and the actual outcomes of her policies. It's becoming harder to reconcile the image she presents with what's really happening. At this point, one might joke that running for president seems easier than managing the contradictions in Harris's public image. Every interview feels like a chance for her to shift the conversation, whether it's distancing herself from her strict stance on gun control or trying to present herself as a defender of public safety. But this wasn't even the worst part. When Harris talks about public safety or the economy, her reassurances feel empty. She doesn't seem to offer real solutions to the struggles Americans face every day. Ingram views this as a calculated attempt to avoid responsibility. Instead of facing hard questions, Harris participates in carefully controlled interviews where her responses are rehearsed. This allows her to sidestep tough issues while presenting a polished version of herself to the public. However, this strategy only makes voters feel more disconnected from their leaders. It feels dishonest and disrespectful to the American people, who deserve leaders that are willing to offer real answers and engage with their concerns, not just smooth words and managed appearances. The use of celebrity endorsements and campaigns focused on personality is nothing new, but in Harris's case, it highlights a bigger problem. Her campaign seems to be built around charm and star power, rather than real policies that address the concerns of everyday people. This approach is not only superficial, but it also weakens the democratic process. When politicians focus more on style than substance, it leaves voters feeling like their concerns don't matter. It's as if the goal is to win votes through appearances rather than by engaging with the real issues. This leaves people feeling disconnected and disappointed. What makes this even more troubling is that Harris's approach isn't unique to her. Ingram points out that this is part of a larger trend in modern politics. Politicians like Harris are increasingly focusing on controlling their public image rather than dealing with the challenges the country faces. It's easier to manage appearances than it is to solve real problems like economic inequality or the growing issue of inflation. But this focus on appearances over substance undermines the very democracy that politicians like Harris claim to protect. When they avoid answering tough questions and rely on pre-planned responses, they are not only failing to lead, but they are also insulting the intelligence of the voters. But even more than that, the American people deserve more. They deserve leaders who are willing to tackle the real issues and offer real solutions. They deserve leaders who are not afraid of being held accountable for their actions. Harris's reliance on celebrity endorsements and personality-driven politics might work in the short term, but it's a short-sighted strategy. The voters who are dealing with rising costs, inflation, and border security issues need more than charm. They need concrete answers and meaningful action. Leaders who rely on charm and superficial tactics may win a few elections, but they do a great disservice to the people who put their trust in them. What are your thoughts? Is focusing on image over substance detrimental to our democracy? Comment, like your views, and don't forget to subscribe for more discussions.